Kicking things off with my first tip. My first tip for you guys is to keep 2 ARs or an AR and an SMG if you don't have 50 plus shots in your AR. Now, a lot of you guys are probably going to be wondering, well, why would I need an SMG or even 2 ARs if I already have one? Now, the most common thing that I'm seeing when it's top 5 or 6 is that there's 3 duos miles and miles away from each other, all in really nice forts. No one gets in, no one gets out. And that's the case for everyone's fort. So the way to deal with this is to save a green or blue or purple SMG, because the ammo drops are a lot more common for crappy SMGs than they are for ARs, or at least for me it seems that way. But anyway, if you do this, you end up saving your AR ammo for what actually matters, and that's the target. So you can still use all 50 shots you might need for that medium combat fight. But when you're just poking at each other's forts from afar, and if you don't have a sniper, having a second AR or an SMG can help you a ton with just destroying their walls and floor. Now, obviously, if you get enough ammo for your AR, you can just use that AR and you'll be totally fine. But in many cases, you're not so fortunate to end up with a ton of ammo. Now, in this case, you guys are going to see we were working with the bare bones of weapons, and you're going to see that these guys built a brick fort, but then decided to build up to get a bigger vantage point. Their biggest mistake was making it out of wood. So I pulled out my SMG since I've got 50 shots that I want to save to be able to kill both targets with my AR if I need to, and so I just sprayed their walkway down with the SMG so they fell down. Now, in most cases, people are going to have RPGs and grenade launchers at this point in time. However, if you're not so fortunate, you can still win. You just gotta build strong and save a second gun solely for spraying at their fort. Now, the reason I use the SMG for this specifically here is because the SMG accuracy is all over the place since it's not close range, right? Well, that's actually a good thing when you're using it for this, because you're hitting multiple fort pieces at a time because of the spread. So I just ended up melting their fort. So that's tip number 1. Moving on to tip number 2. This one only works mainly for duos and squads, but if you're playing on duos against someone on the high ground has its benefits, but the high ground's deficit is that you can't see around the hill that you're on. So what I did was I had my buddy John sneak up around the outskirts of the hill while still using my SMG to use the first tip, so they thought we were still both here because I was firing from our fort. While distracted, John snuck up on them, and then I jumped down and headed toward the care package once I destroyed the majority of their fort, and he was able to sneak up on them, so they had to move. This is because they had fallen down, and this is where we both met up together, and we ended up actually taking both of them by surprise. Now, was this coordination really good and unlikely in most scenarios? Well, yes, but sometimes that's what it takes to win, and I'm telling you, you want to be using these types of diversions, whether that be tossing bluff grenades or smokes or shooting like I did or whatever you want to do. It's huge. A diversion is huge. If you can get their full attention and get them to focus on one person, then use that to your advantage. If you're playing on squads, if all 3 of your team members are stealthy enough, they can sneak up on that fort while they still think all 4 of you are in your fort. Hey, before we move on, I just want to quickly mention that my Twitch streams are every Wednesday and Friday at 7 o'clock and 7:30 p.m. So if you want to see me live streaming, be sure to tune in at those dates and those times. Tip number 3, run near the storm, or if you have the proper amount of med kits, run in it. Now, there are a few ways to make it into that tiny circle without being picked off, but one sure way that I've used is literally barely making it each time when the storm comes. Now, just about every strategy guide that I've seen says that you just need to be inside of it, which doesn't really tell you a whole lot. But what I'm saying is that this doesn't mean trap yourself in the storm far out. What I mean by this is play close to the line, but still outside of it, and when the storm comes, you can either, if you think it's totally clear, run with or alongside the purple, but if you hear the gunfire near the area in the circle, you may actually want to take cover right next to the border and actually wait a couple seconds. And if you're on solo, then obviously this works the best because you don't have to both get med kits, but if you have a med kit, you can literally wait until you're like 20 health and then just go ahead and pop the med kit and you're back where you were, except you've not only allowed for the hardcore purgers to kill themselves, leaving behind all kinds of awesome loot, but you've also lost all suspicion. So if they were maybe looking at the border while it moved and they saw you, well, then they may just presume that you were lost to the storm. And again, this is a rare circumstantial strategy, but it is one that the pros use, because if you have a med kit, it will work. With bandages, it may not be worth losing the 25 health, but with the medkit, you lose pretty much nothing from doing so. Moving on to tip number 4. Tip number 4 for you guys is going to be to get your brick or metal materials up to 250 plus early on. Now, the reason I say this is because making your fort at the very end is very important, and considering top 10 or top 5 players all have RPGs, well, you're not going to do so well if you put up a wood structure or even some wood stairs to get an angle on someone. You want to use that wood very early on to raid houses, to sneak into the roofs. Those scars will destroy your wood hut. Some people like to just hope people drop materials and go for kills, but you want to go to locations like brick houses or places with a lot of metal, like say the prison, because then your hut has now become an impenetrable fortress, and that's what you want. And considering how unpredictable the circle is, you need to be ready to move in, so you want to be getting those materials early on. So the best way that you can do that is to land somewhere that has good materials. And as for tip number 5, this tip is mainly directed at squads because solo and duo is pretty rough a minute into the purge, but squads, bear in mind, most squads are not coordinated teams. Get in a Discord or a Skype call with some guys you know are decent. But my tip is that if you're in squads, go to hotspots. Now, it sounds ridiculous to go to a hotspot, but think about it. The 5 or 10 sets of shed and folk house will only have so much loot in them. Take a town, and then rather than just helping out 2 people, now there's enough loot and you can satisfy all 4 of your buddies. So that's my tip. Go somewhere hot, but somewhere hot that's away from the bus, so it's not totally overwhelming. But 4 people, if everyone gets a gun and you take 2 houses, or say do 2 and 2, so you're still together in duos, you should take the town, whatever it is, no problem, unless they're too close to the bus. This way you start with epic and legendary loot. In solo or duos, I usually get my epic and legendaries from people toward the end of the game, but in squads, you can claim what's yours, team up and stick together, take that stuff right away. You'll get all the legendary and epic loot and dominate that game. Just don't stay wherever you were for too long, because you're probably going to have drawn a little bit of attention to your location after killing everyone in that location. Despite the aggressive start, your attention is still very much to go unseen after that as a group until the very end, but this method works best for squads also, because if you take a house, well, you've got some wood and some bricks and some metal, right? But if you take a town, well, now you've got all the wood and all the bricks and all the metal. So bear that in mind when you're playing on squads. And bonus tips. Number 1, make sure you adjust your vertical and horizontal sensitivity accordingly for the most accuracy when you're going for those headshots. Number 2, peek corners and use a good headset with preferably atmosphere to help you distinguish footsteps and other sound. And lastly, number 3, don't pop the bush unless you're sniping or hiding waiting toward the end of the game. Why do I say this? Well, because a moving bush is even more detectable than a moving person. So don't be a moving bush, because it will also hinder your sights when you go to shoot. So if you're gonna pop it on your fort or on a mountain with a good vantage point, so you can effectively use the bush rather than it hindering you, and then get someone to laugh at you and get popped when they see a moving bush in the middle of the road. There's only so many places a bush can be, guys, and that's a disadvantage in a lot of ways. But don't pop the bush if you don't have the means to use it. And that's going to conclude my pro tips video.